Please rise for the gospel. The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 2nd chapter. The child Jesus grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem, searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why are you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. I know that everyone's favorite part of the service is when I have a children's sermon, because that's the one you listen to the most, but today you don't get one. We have the bells instead, and I do want to thank you all for coming and playing for us. It's a good thing to add to our worship. But I'm reminded of as I begin to preach, I'm reminded of the man who went to church as a visitor, and on his way, I guess not a visitor, a member of the church, and on his way out of the church, he said, "Pastor, after listening to your sermon today, you're smarter than Einstein." Which is good, the pastor liked hearing that. And so, he thought about it all week and said, "Well, I'm going to dig a little more into this. I don't get enough compliments." And so the next week after the service, he said, "I thank you for saying that I'm smarter than Einstein last week. What did you mean by that? Was it my great preaching? Was it the jokes? What was it?" And the man said, "Well, I was reading that when Einstein was alive, they said there were only 10 people who could understand him, and you're much better. Nobody can understand you." So with fear of that as my goal here, let me begin today by just looking. Today's sermon is going to be a little different from most. I have 2 points I want to make from the lesson. But before that, I can say that I had been planning on preaching on the Epiphany. Tomorrow is Epiphany. That's a great holiday of the church. And so I picked out hymns for Epiphany. I picked out lessons. I had everything going. I was going to talk about the 3 wise men and traveling. But I looked at the back of the bulletin, and they decided to print the lessons for the 2nd Sunday after Christmas. For those who have been keeping count, today is the 12th day of Christmas. Just is. And so today is the last day we get to sing all these Christmas songs. And so if you're wondering why we're doing it, that's it. We're ending up the Christmas season. And who doesn't like to sing carols one more time anyway? By next week, the tree will be gone, the liturgy will be back to usual, and things will all be moving along the way they usually do, which is, I hope, not as confusing as Einstein. As we begin today, today's sermon has 2 issues, 2 points to make. The first is the word custom. It says that Jesus, Mary and Joseph took Jesus up as was their custom. The word in Greek for custom is ethos, from which we get ethics. That's where we get the word, but it's not like ethics. Ethos appears in the New Testament 12 times. 10 of those times in Luke and Acts. And the ones in Luke are like this, and the ones in Acts are different. Those are the when people are accusing Jesus and the apostles of messing things up. You're coming in here and you're not doing things the way that we customarily do them. And you know that feeling. You've had me here for a year, and I am certainly not past the lockdown. You've had to adapt to all sorts of different things. Some of them you probably like, and some of them you can't wait for me to go, so that you don't have to have them again. And maybe your next pastor's going to have other things, the other customs that he does, and that's a good thing. We sometimes get too calcified in the way we do things, and we forget that the gospel is meant for all people at all times, and there's more than one way to do things. But go back to the ethos. In the Gospel of Luke, when Jesus goes off to pray by himself, and sends the disciples across the lake or the sea, he goes off to pray by himself, as was his custom. When Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, the disciples knew it because that was where he customarily went. The ethics in the New Testament and in Luke's Gospel especially are not the ethics that we generally think of. We think of ethics as don't steal, don't cheat on your taxes, don't, and a whole list of things not to do. But in the New Testament, and especially in Luke's Gospel, the ethics are the things that we do not as not what not to do, but things that we do in order to show what we are and what we believe. And so the Holy Family traveled to Jerusalem every year for the festivals. Now, if you average people walking from Nazareth to Jerusalem, you figure that they're going to make 15 miles a day. Now, I can't do 15 miles a day. I can do it once, but I don't know. A few years ago, I ran a half marathon. That was enough. 15 miles a day walking up and down the hills with sandals seems like a lot to me, but it would take between 4 and 5 days if you take the shortest route. And most Jews would not take the shortest route. They'd walk around Samaria because you didn't want to walk through it. But if you took the shortest route, 4 to 5 days, 6, that's a lot of miles, over 60 miles of walking up and down hills in your sandals. And not everyone is healthy and young, and so they probably didn't average 15 miles a day. Because you didn't want to leave grandma behind. Or maybe you did, but customarily you didn't do it, even if you wanted to. Customs. Every year they would travel there. And that's how Jesus learned. They came from a Jewish family, a very religious Jewish family that would do what the customs and the traditions of the Jewish people all wanted to do. That was what was expected for all Jewish families, and his was like all the others that were orthodox and keeping the customs and traditions alive. Which is probably why when Mary and his brothers heard the things he was preaching and the things he was doing, they came to take him home. And because he was not breaking the customs, breaking the traditions. He was healing on the Sabbath. He was talking to Samaritans. He was eating with tax collectors. These were not traditions among the Jewish people. Being pure was a tradition, not having daily discussions and food with people who were evil sinners and were outside the tradition. But he did all that. Healing a centurion's son, someone who was a Roman, an occupier. He did that. That was certainly not according to custom. But he did that all, so his family came to take him back. But no, he said, no, who's my family now? My family are my brothers, my mother, my brothers and sisters. They're the people who hear me and they're not offended by me. These are my family. And the tradition that I'm starting, this is the tradition they're going to live. And so we come to the first point is, and this is the more the law in the sermon than the gospel. The first point is, what are the customs we teach? We just had Christmas. For many families, Christmas carols are Little Drummer Boy. And, other such things. And that never mention Jesus. They're the ones you hear in the mall. Because they're not offensive. Well, they offend me. But they're not offensive. Customs that we have is Christmas is about the presents we can get, or even the presents we give. We try to teach kids giving is more blessed than receiving. But even that's not what Christmas is about. Christmas is about God giving us his Son to come and die for us. You just played, what child is this? In the second stanza, when he came to have spears and nails. That's not what you see on Christmas movies, on TV. And I'm not going to just beat up on Christmas. The secular holiday of Christmas is what it is, and I can't change it, neither can you. But what I can say is, what customs and traditions are you teaching your family? Do you teach your children to say grace before meals? That's a pretty low bar. But there are lots of families that don't. When I show up, they want the pastor to do it, which I'm fine to do. I'm always glad to pray. But we also should be in the business of teaching our children. And we teach our children all sorts of things, even when we're not aware of it. We teach our children that they should go to church and Sunday school, and then we sleep late. We're teaching them. We teach them not just in our words, but in what we do. And so today, as we realize the customs that Mary and Joseph had, the customs that helped to form Jesus. And remember how this gospel lesson ends, that when he got back to Nazareth, he grew in the faith and wisdom and understanding. Well, how did he do that? He did it by living in a traditional, customary Jewish family. A family that went to at least the men went to the synagogue, and that would hear the scriptures and interpret the scriptures and discuss the scriptures and ask questions. When it talks about Jesus asking questions, I don't know if any of you have much experience with Jewish people, but it's what they do. That's how they learn. That's how they teach. They ask questions and give answers. And it's to people not used to it, it sounds like they're arguing. I come from a Norwegian family. We didn't talk at all. And then I went to my Jewish friends, and they were always haggling back and forth about everything. That's how they learn. It's how they interact with each other. It's good. It's not better or worse than the Norwegian traditions. It's just different. And so when Jesus is sitting in the synagogue and he's teaching and learning from the elders there, Jesus came to bring healing to people. To reach out to those tax collectors and prostitutes and Romans, and reach out to all those people. Today, he's reaching out to these people, elders sitting in the temple, opening up their minds to the fact that God is acting in the world and acting in this child, this 12-year-old. Now, I've had a lot of experience teaching 12-year-old kids in confirmation class. I don't wish that on a lot of people. They're wonderful when they're in 6th grade, but by the time, beginning of confirmation class, 7th grade, little kids would come in, and the girls looked so cute. They'd come in, but somewhere in the next 2 years, their mother would tell them it was okay to wear makeup. And they'd come in and they'd look like some streetwalker or something, everything all over the place. It takes them a while to tamper it down. And the little boys, once puberty hits, they're not listening to me, they're looking at Mary Jane. They don't care about me at all. It's the reality of the situation. And here's Jesus at that age, sitting in the temple talking because he's at his father's house. as his father's son. That's the second point of today's sermon. Whose son is he? Jesus is true God and true man. As true man, child born to a refugee family in Bethlehem, later on moved back to Nazareth, where his father had some sort of a career, job, shop, whatever. His father was a carpenter working there. That little child growing up, with his parents. This is the only story in the New Testament between Jesus' birth and his baptism. This is it, the one we read today. And the church has understandably tried to fill in the gaps over the years. And there is, around the year 125, someone claiming to be St. James wrote the Infancy Gospel of St. James. And it fills in the gaps, all the gaps. Tells you who Mary's parents were, tells you all sorts of things. And you read about Jesus, who, while he was the son of Mary and Joseph, was also the Son of God. And so he's walking down one of the streets in Nazareth, and some little boy comes running out of the side street and bumps into him. And Jesus is annoyed at him and says, "That's it for you. You'll never do that again." The kid falls down dead. And then Joseph comes out and says, "No one's going to want to play with you, Jesus. You keep killing kids, you're going to be awfully lonely." And so Jesus looks at him and says, "Okay, for you I'll raise him up," raises him up from the dead. And then says, "But remember, you're only my adopted father." What a gem of a child. That's not the Jesus in the rest of the New Testament. And there's a reason why that book wasn't included in the New Testament. There's a reason why this is the only story. Because this is where we get to wrestle with, yes, he came from a good Jewish family and was raised by them. And yes, we believe in the miraculous birth, that he was a child of God, the Holy Spirit coming upon the Virgin Mary. We believe all of that. But we know also that as we believe all of that, whose child is this? What child is this? This child, the son of Mary and Joseph, and I think it's only in Luke's gospel, he's just called the son of Mary, which is an insult in the Jewish theology of the time. So you're always your father's son. And when they call him the son of Mary, they're saying, "Hey, we remember you don't have, your mother was pregnant before you were born." So when you read the New Testament, you hear the son of Mary. It's not a compliment. Not a compliment at all. He's the son of Mary and Joseph, and the Son of God. And sometimes these things compete. The son of Mary and Joseph should have been with the other people traveling back to Nazareth. They had gone to Jerusalem. They had done what was customary. They had fulfilled the traditions of the elders. And now it's time to go home and get back to work. That's what the son of Mary and Joseph should have done. But the Son of God belonged in his Father's house. Two good things competing with one another. In our lives, each week if I come here and I talk about sins, I can tell you, sin is bad. It's the old story about President Calvin Coolidge went to church one Sunday, and when he came home, his wife said to him, "How was church?" "Fine." I called him Silent Cal for a reason. And afterwards she said to him, "Well, what'd the preacher talk about?" He said, "Sin." She said, "Well, what'd he say?" "He's against it." We can talk about sin. And I'm against sin. Keep the commandments. That's a baseline. But further than that, what do you do when it's two good things? How do you decide? When you have, on the one hand, the good thing of obedience to your parents and traveling with the people of your hometown, and on the other hand, being obedient to the Father and going to the temple for a little more. That's the issue Jesus has to face. What's the issue we have to face? Plenty of times we have to face the same issue between good things and bad things. There are times when there are conflicts. I've had them in my life, and I'd like to say I always did the right thing, but I won't lie to you. Not about that anyway. Have to be more important than that. It's like saying, I'm not a thief. Well, I'm not a thief. $100, you're safe with me. $3 million, I'm tempted. I'm not going to lie about that. I haven't always succeeded, and you haven't either. Sometimes there have been tensions, and you've torn between work and family. Too many of us have chosen work over family too often, both of which are good things. We need to work. But if you consistently choose work over family, you will lose. That's a great temptation for clergy, but it's a great temptation for all people. There are other temptations out there where there are good things that are competing against each other. And how do you separate them out? Well, I don't know that I can tell you the answer to that, to tell you the truth. I don't know that there is an answer to that. I think you do the best you can. Philip Melanchthon was Martin Luther's best friend. When Martin Luther got married, he was the best man. He was ugly from the pictures of him, but he was a bright man. He's the guy who organized the education system in Germany, because Luther said we need more young men to be preachers. So Philip, go out and organize schools, and he did. And the education in Germany is still based upon the way that he organized things. He was a bright man and a very influential man. But when Luther was in the Wartburg Castle, hiding from the emperor, and Philip was down dealing in Augsburg with the emperor, people were arguing to Luther, and Philip was also writing back to Luther saying, I don't know what I should do sometimes. I'm here arguing, I'm in a room with a couple hundred people, they're all telling me I'm wrong, and I'm standing up before the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the ambassadors of the Pope, and what should I do? Luther wrote to him. Today you get 2 Luther quotes. Luther wrote back to him and said, if you are a preacher of grace, then preach a true and not a fictitious grace. If grace is true, you must bear a true and not a fictitious sin. God does not save people who are only fictitious sinners. Be a sinner and sin boldly. But believe and rejoice in Christ even more boldly. For he is victorious over sin, death, and the world. As long as we are here, we have sin. This life is not the dwelling place of righteousness, but as St. Peter says, we look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Pray boldly. You too are a mighty sinner. That's a nice thing to tell your best friend. There will be days when you're conflicted. What do I do? Like I said, I use the example of work and family, but it can be all sorts of things. We are called to give of ourselves, to give generously, and yet we want to keep something back for our old age. 2 very good things. It's a conflict, and it's something that we all have to deal with. And there isn't an answer I can give you or anyone else can give you other than what Martin Luther gave to his friend Melanchthon. Recognize you are a sinner. There will be days you make the wrong choice. There will be days when there is no right choice. There will be days when you can only get confused. But you can't freeze. You have to do something. And when you do it, should it later prove to have been a sin, realize that God's grace is greater than sin. Whatever sins you commit, his love for you is stronger than that. So trust in the love of God. Jesus was conflicted over his family and God, going this way and that way. You can be conflicted over things in your life too. As a matter of fact, if you don't have some conflicts, you're probably not leading the right life. Bertrand Russell, I believe it was, said, an unexamined life, it's not worth living. You will have times when you're conflicted and you have to examine yourself. We have to deal with it. That's where we are while we're in this world. One foot in the old world with sin and death and the devil, and the other foot in the new world with our Heavenly Father. That's where we are. And we know where we're going. Jesus went back to Nazareth with his parents, but then he came back to Jerusalem years later, probably in between two, but he came back to Jerusalem, and he came to bear the nails and the spear. He came to bear our sins, so that when you choose wrongly, his grace should be more than sufficient for you. And now, talking about me preaching too long, maybe, I hope you understood that. There was a minister who was getting all his teeth pulled and waiting for implants to be put in. The Sunday they pulled his teeth, he only preached for 8 minutes. The next Sunday, his gums were feeling a little better. He preached for 20 minutes. The following Sunday, an hour and a quarter. And afterwards, the elders said to him, "What happened, Pastor?" He said, "Well, the first Sunday, my gums were hurt. It was tough to talk. It hurt to talk. I did the best I could. The second Sunday, they were putting in the teeth. It still hurt a lot. But this morning, I grabbed my wife's teeth, and I just couldn't shut up." That's for you. I'm going to pay for that later. Anyway, may the peace of God be with you today and all days. Amen. Please stand now. We'll sing the next.